question, after the cancellation of the presidential elections, we had the organization of the governmental coalition, which was the remake of the former existing governmental coalition with the same prime minister, with numerous ministers belonging to the previous government or governments, especially on the side of the Social Democratic Party, with some new names coming proposed by the liberals, coming from outside the political world, from the rather professional technocratic world, and with the change that the party of the Hungarian minority, the Democratic Alliance of Hungarians in Romania, was co-opted in this government with two key ministries, including the Ministry of Finance, which is a premier in a post 1990 government in Romania. So this coalition without the Union for the Salvation of Romania, who was still very critical about the cancellation of the elections in November, went into a path of rather austerity as the number of ministries is reduced, but also austerity by the budget it tried to adopt, and succeeded in the end, with many restrictions, but also with many intentions of reform, all of them being suspended until the presidential elections to take place. Finally, these presidential elections have been postponed to 4 and 18 May, so 5 months after the organization of the new coalition government, and meanwhile the discussions between the members of this coalition government resulted into the designation of Mr. Crin Antonescu as common presidential candidate. So Antonescu was a former leader of the Liberal Party by the end of the 2000s and beginning of 2010s. Surprisingly accepted by both the Social Democrats and the Liberals, under the circumstances where he went into conflict with the Social Democrats, dissolving the union he formed, a Social Liberal Union, in 2014, but also being inclined to enter easily in conflict with the former supporters of President Băsescu from the National Liberal Party, the former Democratic Party, who were among those who have been under the attack of Crin Antonescu during the second suspension of Traian Băsescu during the summer of 2012. So, in spite of all these odds, he was seen as being a rather compromised figure of the two parties, and also accepted by the electorate of the Hungarian alliance in Romania, which proved to be, according to the polls, not so right. But anyway, he was rapidly designated as the unique candidate of these three parties, and he started to campaign in spite of the difficult beginning of this campaign, and in spite of criticism coming from within and without outside the main coalition, governmental coalition. At the same time, on the other side of the political spectrum, the mayor of Bucharest, declared his intention to run the very day of the annulment of the presidential elections in early December 2024. Strong of his popularity as mayor of Bucharest, also running against corruption and be having the image of reformist and with a lot of intransigence regarding the Systems Party. He rapidly replaced in this position Elena Lasconi, the candidate who made it into the second round of the November 24 elections. But the Union for the Salvation of Romania and Lasconi herself were very reluctant to back the candidature of Nicu Șordan, and she continued to run, and actually in the end she remained in the campaign in order, and this produces a divide between this electorate, many on the side of Dan, less numerous voters on the side of Lasconi, but maybe enough to prevent him to qualify to the second round. And in the other opposition, the nationalist opposition, the strategy of Mr. Simion was maybe the most interesting element. Mr. Simion, who made only 13% in the elections in November, was lagging far behind Călin Georgescu, and he understood that he could qualify as a candidate, or unique candidate of the far right in the next elections, only provided he accepted and prompted Mr. Georgescu, making a step behind and pushing Georgescu in the campaign, because he knew very well, like many others, that Mr. Georgescu won't be able to run in this election. He will be forbidden to do so by the electoral committee, or we thought back then by the constitutional court, if not by the Central Electoral Committee. And the bet of Mr. Simion proved right, because he lost face in favor of Mr. Georgescu in a first move, promoting Mr. Georgescu as a candidate, and just to remain there as the unique possible candidate of this far right, when Mr. Georgescu was not able to run anymore. And this in spite of the presupposed candidature of the leader of the very small and unstable party created by the supporters of Mr. Georgescu, Mrs. Gavrila. With the polarization into these three main pillars of the political life, so to say, after the beginning of 2025. Another maybe two other major elements should be mentioned as possible game changers. President Iohannis, whose mandate was prolonged by the Constitutional Court until the inauguration of the new president's mandate, was forced by the liberals, by the social democrats, and of course by the nationalist opposition to resign in early February. But this was seen as an attempt to remain into power, and of course it harmed the possible pre-campaign of Mr. Antonescu. Iohannis was replaced, according to the Constitution, by the president of the Senate, the leader of the Liberal Party, Ilie Bolojan, who still holds a high degree of acceptance and popularity among the people, but who cannot run because he's not neutral for the two other parties of the governmental coalition. And the candidate already installed is Crin Antonescu. And many criticism come on the side of the liberals and the more liberal electorate who would prefer Mr. Bolojan to Mr. Antonescu. And maybe the last major event is the political return of Victor Ponta, former prime minister of the Social Democratic Party, defeated in the presidential elections back in 2014 by Klaus Iohannis. Mr. Ponta passed through different political ideologies and options, from T-shirts with Che Guevara to centrist social democracy, and then to nationalism. And now he's the Trumpist candidate in these elections, trying to get a part of the votes of Mr. Georgescu, those who wouldn't vote for Mr. Simion, the more radical and more anti-systemic ones, and also trying to get as much support as possible from the Social Democratic Party, whose members, some of them at least, are upset of not having their own candidate to the presidential elections, in the presidential elections. So Mr. Ponta plays now the role of an independent, but tries to join these two electorates, the discontent social democratic electorate, and including MPs and mayors, and Mr. Georgescu's more radical voters, and it seems to be successful according to the polls. Some of them place him in the second round. Some of them, nevertheless, I think all of them show that he's growing in the polls. So to end it with this passage into review of what happened, the result is more than uncertain, and the odds for the next elections are still very, very open because of this new emergence of old new politicians who reinvent themselves and who still have apparently strong networks to promote them. My final word here is to say that in at the beginning, we thought, we hoped at least, that the parties, especially the systemic parties, learned at least some lessons from the 24th of November and would not repeat these lessons further on, trying to avoid such mistakes in the future. But what we see is that they learned perfectly nothing, and so the same divisions and attempts to artificially temper the results of the elections are still the main strategy of these parties, and the electorate is very discontent and wishes to give apparently another lesson to them.
Okay, thank you very much, Sergiu. Professor Tufiș, can you explain, I don't know if you want to add something about the main candidates, if you agree with this presentation, and can you explain us who will vote for what party? What is the sociological votes, and what is the big cleavages today in Romania? Is it possible to imagine how we can explain the situation by cleavages? Thank you.
Right. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion, and hello to Sergiu, to Sorina, to Cristi if he arrived, and hello to everybody who's attending and listening to us. I quite agree with what Sergiu was describing previously with respect to the candidates. The only thing that I would add is that, at least from my perspective, Victor Ponta is even a larger surprise than Sergiu made it to be. For me, Victor Ponta's career should have been finished by the end of 2016, after he needed to resign after the collective fire. And I did not expect him to actually be able to reinvent himself to such extent. So I am a bit surprised by his resilience, even though his resilience, as Sergio already mentioned, is based on a move towards becoming, well, not necessarily becoming, but adopting an extremist perspective. I don't think he's an extremist. He's just a chameleon that is adopting whatever strategy he thinks will make you advance his interest. So from that perspective, he is, I believe, quite a dangerous candidate, and it might be a surprise for many of us in May. When it comes to trying to explain the votes, I'm going to start with a caveat, and that is that in Romania we don't really have recent quality surveys data that allow us to actually make informed descriptions of what the electorate is doing. So I will try to, let's say, start from the way I'm reading the Romanian electorate, and then try to figure out how the electorate is going to vote in the future elections in May, 2 months from now. And I think that it's probably clear for everybody, and it's probably something that it's not going to be criticized very much, that a significant part of the Romanian population is at a boiling point that has continued to increase after the previous elections in the summer of 2024. So I'm going to take a step back to what was happening in 2024, and I'm going to argue that the mainstream political parties somehow played with the fire by trying to change the dates of the elections and arrange the elections so that it would be in their benefit. To some extent, all political parties do that, but I think they exaggerated this, and they continue doing this throughout the year. So they combined the local and the European Parliament elections, as you know, the argument was that they were trying to keep the extremists from getting into the European Parliament. Actually, what they were trying to do was to increase the share of the votes for Social Democrats and Liberals via the mayors that were going to bring more people to the vote. And as we've seen, that did not really work very well, because we ended up with the largest proportion of extremist members of the European Parliament that Romania sent since we joined the European Union. So it was already a messed up strategy from the start, in my opinion. And apparently, the political parties, the mainstream political parties, did not see that, or did not want to interpret that in this way. They continue doing the same thing. They continue with the same strategy of messing up the elections for the presidential and the parliamentary elections as well. So from that's in a way what was happening in the previous year. And people, of course, they realized the strategy for what it was. It was just an attempt to benefit from being in power and from getting more votes just by playing with the electoral rules. The other element that I think it's quite easy to accept when it comes to the Romanian electorate is that they are in the moment, and they have been in the previous year as well, Romanian voters have been in a position where they don't actually have somebody to vote for if they disagree with the parties in power, somebody to vote for that is still democratic. So the fact that we had the Social Democrats and the Liberals governing since the middle of the pandemic, and then going through the beginning of the war, and now we are already in the third year of the war at the borders of Romania, that was a significant problem for the political system, because in addition to just, you know, the regular erosion of trust and of support for the parties that are in power, we also have the additional erosion of support that came from the fact that we are passing through two successive significant crises, the pandemic and the war. And normally you have an opposition that is able to capture the votes of those who are disappointed with the political parties in power. The problem is that the opposition did not exist anymore in Romania in the last 2 or 3 years. Social Democrats and liberals came together, repeating, and this is going to be an important point, I think, they were repeating what was happening in 2014-15. And the fact that we are seeing in these upcoming presidential elections both Cristian Antonescu and Victor Ponta, which were the main figures of that previous iteration of social democratic and liberal union, it's not necessarily a surprise. So there were no mainstream political parties. The only one that could have acted as a repository for the discontent vote was the branch of Union Save Romania, Repair, all of these newer parties, but they failed to capitalize on what could have been easy votes for them. And they were struggling with internal infights, and they focused only on what I consider to be relevant issues, how to get to power and how to divide whatever little power they had amongst themselves. And again, the people, the electorate, saw them for what they were. They were incapable of negotiating with the mainstream political parties. They were radicalizing, in this sense, the political arena by themselves, just by the fact that they were unwilling to negotiate and to discuss with the mainstream political parties. And generally, they had the Save Romania Union and the others around them. They had a very, in a way, I would call it childish perspective to politics, which might make sense if you are a social movement. That's how they started. You behave in a certain way when you are in the streets and you want to be taken into account. But once you get into power, once you get at the real political table, the same strategies that you're using while you're on the streets do not really work very well in the parliament. So they never understood that, and as a result of this failure of them to grow up as a political party, they were never perceived as a valid repository for the opposition votes, right? So that's how we ended up with what was happening last year, with people voting for George Simion and the Alliance for the Union of Romanians and all of the other political parties that were created. Basically, a significant part of the population, and I suspect that by now it's already larger than 35% of the votes, I think it's going towards 40% of the vote, it's looking for something else. And they don't really care, in my opinion, based on discussions with some of the people that are coming from these parts. They don't really care who the candidate of the extremist parties are. What they really want is to get rid of the mainstream politicians. And this is, just as Sergio was saying earlier, the mainstream political parties did not learn the lesson from the summer and fall elections in the previous year, and they basically came up with the same tired candidates. It's like they put their hands into the pool of candidates that they had, and they extracted probably the worst candidates that they could have come up with. Cristian Antonescu, I mean, he has been in Romanian politics even from the beginning of the 90s. He was a minister for youth in, I think it was Roman's government cabinet at the time. It was so long ago that I don't even remember exactly all of the positions that he had. But he was with the Liberals since the 1990s. So that's 35 years. I'm not even going to mention the fact that for the last 10 years,
we can't hear you, Jean-Michel, and we can't hear Claudio either.
I think Claudio is blocked.
Yes, I think. Okay, maybe Professor Soare from Florence University, can you share some analysis about what we learned in recent months about the state of democracy in in Romania and the resistance of the rule of law in Romania. What we can understand about the state of the law.
But thank you, Jean-Michel, thank you. But Claudiu is back. I do not know if you prefer.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on a hotel connection and it seems to be a little bit unstable. I switched to my phone connection. Maybe it's going to be better. So what to say is that we haven't seen the worst yet, in my opinion. So all that the various political institutions in Romania have tried to do at the end of last year, with banning first Soșoacă and then canceling the elections and then banning Călin Georgescu from running. All of these have been attempts to somehow mitigate the risk of having the winner of the presidential elections to be an extremist candidate. And I think at the stage the Romanian population is right now, sure, we've gotten rid of Călin Georgescu, but I mean, people are hoping for Nicu Dan, for instance, I think, to enter into the second round and hoping that he will win the second round. But that is not a certainty. I mean, probably the same probability I would give for a second round between Crin Antonescu and Victor Ponta, both of them with problems. And as I was mentioning, both of them, in a way, they are reconstructing what was happening in Romanian politics 10 years ago. From that perspective, it's a return to the past. And it's exactly the kind of past that the Romanian citizens, the Romanian voters hate at the moment. And I'm not using the word hate just to be very harsh. That's how these people feel about the mainstream political parties and about their candidates. So from that perspective, I would say the political parties have not learned anything from previous elections. And I think that the citizens, the voters, are just waiting for the May elections to show them that they are still really unhappy with how they are being treated. And all of the decisions that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 months have done nothing to alleviate the fears and the demands of these voters who felt unrepresented until now, and they are still they're just as unrepresented as before, but adding to that, they are also angry as never they have been before, in my opinion. So from that perspective, I think it's possible that we will have a surprise and we will end up with a Victor Ponta.
Okay, thank you. I give the floor now to Sorina Soare.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. It is a pleasure to be here with you today, and it is a pleasure to have heard the comments of brilliant colleagues like Sergiu and Claudiu. And I would say that I buy all of their comments. And before starting with the answer to your question, I would just like to add a couple of at least personal comments. Probably because I'm in Sicily, I got inspired by Lampedusa, and well, the impression I have is that it is definitely the traditional situation where the precise quote is for things to remain the same. For things to remain the same, everything must change, and this is the impression that we have nowadays. We do not have Călin Georgescu anymore in the competition, but however, it looks like he is there, and his topics have remained quite present. And when Sergiu and Claudiu say that the Romanian parties and the mainstream parties, they fail to learn the lesson, I would say it's definitely the case, but I would also add that they misunderstood what happened in the winter of 2024. I will try to explain myself. My impression is, at the moment at least, is that practically all the so-called mainstream candidates, and not only Victor Ponta, they try to emulate, at least partially, the topics that have been launched with a lot of activism by Călin Georgescu in the campaign, in particular between the first round of the presidential election and what will become the decision of the Constitutional Court that led to the annulment of the election. They have, what we see nowadays across almost almost all the mainstream candidates is a hybrid position. While they maintain a EU endorsement in their programs and position, they have moved quite a lot on realignment with a lot of or the core issues at the center of the agenda of President Trump, in particular on traditional values. And this is something that you can see starting from the position of the candidate endorsed by the current government, but also to, for example, Nicușor Dan or Mrs. Lasconi. Having said that, you asked me about the rule of law. Well, the paradox of the Romanian democracy is that on the one side, one might celebrate the fact that a militant democracy that has been considered a pillar of a solid democracy based on the German tradition inaugurated at the end of the Second World War has been implemented in Romania, although it came quite late because the same candidate that would be considered part of the decision that brought the Constitutional Court to cancel the election, the presidential election, the same candidate was accused in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, yes, in February 2022, the Prosecutor General Office took an ex officio action and opened a criminal case against Georgescu for committing crimes that are somehow overlapping with what was, for example, part of the case against Mrs. Șoșoacă in October. So on the one side, I would say that we have a militant democracy created in, I would say, in a couple of weeks by the Constitutional Court in the understanding of the sentence of the 6th of December. But on the other side, we have a quite, I would say, delicate and complex by-effect, which is connected to the perception of this decision in the international arena. The Economist Intelligence Unit placed Romania as a hybrid regime, in a far worse category than Hungary and Slovakia. Most of the decision, if you go to read the report, most of the decisions are connected to the position of the Constitutional Court and the so-called invasion of the rule of law in the political realm. Strangely enough, when you look at the report, the candidate Georgescu, which is so badly spoke about in part of the Romanian media, is considered in the end one of an opposition candidate which has been cancelled by somehow political decision from the competition. But having said that, I would like to add a little element which in my understanding is quite relevant, and it is connected to what Claudiu has said with regard to the context of the election, and in particular what we have in terms of surveys at the time being. They show that the voting intentions are extremely fragmented, and in the meantime polarized, because what you can see is George Simion in particular, but not only him, also Victor Ponta capitalizing a revolt against the system, and on the other hand, you see other candidates that, for the most part, connected to urban voters with medium and high income and a high level of education that tend to vote for so-called progressive. Although I would like to add, these progressive candidates, there are a lot of caveats to be added. In particular, for example, if we look at their position to what we have as values enshrined in the treaties of the European Union, in particular in Article 2, with regard to, for example, same-sex marriages and by effects of the Article 2, same-sex marriages and other similar values. And the last element I would like to talk about is the high level of polarization. And I think this is something that is going to remain. I do not know, and I think it's very difficult to say what will be the result of this presidential election, but in terms of who will be the next president of Romania. But what we know for sure is that the polarization we see in the Romanian electorate a kind of affective polarization similar to what we know from the literature in the American system, and in particular in the most recent context in the States, has become quite visible in the Romanian context also. And this is something that, in my understanding, is going to remain also because of this very complex emulation, superficial and complex and still superficial emulation of the far-right agenda by so many candidates, that in the end show that the polarization is there, and they are trying to attract voters by copying the message of Georgescu, although a couple of months ago they were preachers of European Union and European values.
Okay, thank you very much for this three brilliant introduction. Before to give the floor to the audience, can you give us an answer to the question of this webinar? How can we save the democracy in Romania, for your personal point of view? What is your answer? I think you can speak about the subject during 2 hours. Then please 5 minutes for Sergio, 5 minutes for Claudio, 5 minutes for Sorina, and after this I give the floor to the audience with the yellow hand. Sergio, what is the main point?
Could you please just repeat the question?
How can we see, or how can we save the democracy in Romania today? This is a question.
If I knew, I was very far.
In 5 minutes,
of course.
It's very easy.
Yeah. Let's say I think that the first step would be not to elect a far-right president. This is a condition of possibility, I think, for the democratic future of Romania, but not at all a guarantee that democracy will be saved on a long term. But it is something that we need to do. But if this means voting for Mr. Ponta, if he qualifies to the second round, it would be more or less the same result. Democracy will be strongly shaken, and it would be only up to us to bet on Mr. Ponta's opportunism to switch again, to become to do his realpolitik in power, trying to play in multiple registers, and maybe to operate not the twist some sort of a rapprochement towards the European Union. You never know. So if Mr. Ponta is Trumpist today, this could be not the result of a multi-secular path in his conscience, but rather a pure act of opportunism related to a political context. And in this respect, he's of course a political beast with a nose for the situation. So long story short, I think that this leads us to reducing the future of Romanian democracy to, in the case of the election of Mr. Ponta, to the different influences and desires he has, and this is very bad. It means that on the medium term we will be in the same situation as if we elected Mr. Simeon, who will will give us surgery without anesthetics and will lead us immediately in the same turmoil. The only rational solution is to vote for none of these two candidates, and for one of the candidates of the mainstream, even for maybe Mr. Antonescu, and this is the last resort to prevent the election of one of the other two. But this is a condition of possibility, not a guarantee. The guarantees are very weak because once in power, if one of the mainstream candidates is there, and this is the case with Mr. Antonescu, will reproduce exactly what was done before without thinking about the message of the electorate, without strong reforms, and we will expect better times in geopolitical terms while consuming our entire leftovers of democratic resilience. So that's a scenario that wouldn't work. I think that the only solution on a longer term is to elect independent candidate who will keep the pro-European track, and at the same time will try to correct the system thanks to his or her democratic legitimacy, presidential democratic legitimacy. There are not many characters in this election who respond to these requirements. Elena Nasconi had her chance. I don't think she has it anymore, and that would be, let's say, the only corrective path we can take. Not a guarantee at all, also, but a better guarantee, as good as it gets, for a new start, for a fresher start. And that's critically important, I think, also for the longer term projection, not only of Romania, but also of other states, because the pressure on the Romanian elections is so high that it creates a model. And this model is maybe for the first time considered to be possible to follow by the others. So in other words, if an investment in Mr. Simeon and Mr. Ponta proves to be rightful for those forces who invest in them, then the mechanism will be reproduced very rapidly and with much more confidence in other parts of Europe, and so I think, without saying big words, that also a part of the future of European democracy depends on what happens in the presidential elections of May in Romania. Voilà.
Thank you very much, Professor Tufiș.
Yes, thank you. I will keep my camera closed just to save some bandwidth. Apologies for that. I think
because you're laughing of what I say, I think, Claudio.
No. I think out of the people that have talked so far, I am probably the most pessimistic. And the short answer from me would be that we can't really save Romania democracy from the stage where it is right now. Sergio already discussed some of the possible things that will happen depending on who is going to win the presidential elections. What I want to mention here is that if you pay attention on what the political parties have been talking about in the last maybe 2 weeks, they are already thinking about how to manipulate the majority after the next president will be selected. So even if we solve this particular crisis which we have right now in the presidential elections, and I don't think that this can be solved, and I'll come back to that, but even if we solve it, the political parties are already thinking of prolonging the crisis and of trying to reimagine a new majority, trying somehow to argue, I think this is what's in their minds, trying to argue that the alliance that has been forged on the basis of the results from the November 2024 elections does no longer have any legitimacy if we take into account the percentages that the parties are going to take via their candidates. So they somehow make this rather convoluted argument in their minds that they need to renegotiate everything based on the new results of the presidential elections, which they believe will indicate the strengths of the political parties, which they do not, but that's a different issue. So I would expect that 2025 will be a crisis here until they solve this problem with the new majority that they are trying to forge. Looking at the current field of the candidates, we have basically three people who can, three, maybe four, I don't know. So it's either George Simion or Crina Antonescu or Victor Ponta or Nicu Șordan. To be very optimistic about it. If it's Nicu Șordan, he has the disadvantage that he's an independent, he has no political apparatus, he is a sort of an outlier in Romanian politics in the way that he's doing politics. He's very well known for not being very able to negotiate. So I don't see how he can manage to be a strong president if he were to win. So he would basically be at the hands of the Social Democrats and the Liberals, who would just use him as a puppet, I would suspect. If it's George Simion that wins the elections, then the pressure will be for Social Democratic and the Alliance for Union Romania majority in the parliament, trying to kick out the Liberals and the Union Save Romania. And they will focus especially on the percentage of votes that George Simion will get in the first round and then in the second round. If it's Crina Antonescu, then most likely they will try to maintain the actual majority, Social Democrats and Liberals. However, there's going to be a lot of people unhappy about it within these two political parties, and they will migrate to the extremist parties, I would suspect, or maybe to Union Save Romania, but probably fewer people will go in that direction. The result will be that the current majority will become even weaker than it is in this particular moment, even though it will have Crina Antonescu as the president. And finally, if Victor Ponta were to become president, then that means that there's going to be significant pressure again to get rid of Crina Antonescu and then the Liberals, and that will also push somehow towards the solution of a Social Democrats, the Alliance for Union, I forgot the name in English, sorry, the Alliance for the Union of Romania. So either way, we either stay with the current situation, which is already bad for democracy, as I mentioned in my previous intervention, because you don't have an opposition that is democratic to stand up to this social democratic liberals conglomerate. So all of the discontent that people had up to this moment will continue to increase over the next years, or they're going to probably move towards a social democratic majority, because that seems to be the most likely out of all the possible combinations that we see based on the voting intentions for this presidential election. So from that perspective, I think all of the possible outcomes are negative outcomes with respect to the future of democracy in Romania. And I'm also not mentioning at this moment at all the fact that we are surrounded by Turkey, we are surrounded by Serbia, we are surrounded by Hungary, Russia, and Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, they're not guilty of anything. They're just victims in the Russian-Ukrainian war. But I'm just saying that we are surrounded basically by strong non-democratic actors, and we know that geography does play a significant role. And if we are surrounded by these authoritarian regimes, I don't see how we will manage to survive as whatever kind of democracy we are right now. And so Sorina was mentioning, according to The Economist, we're not even a democracy anymore, and I tend to agree with that. But we'll ignore that so that I won't keep any more of the other people's time. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my colleagues have said almost everything that I had in mind, so I will just say that I'm a little bit more optimistic. Why? Because I think there is a weakness that we all know in the Romanian democracy. So suffices to deal with this weakness, which is an issue that we know from the literature, which is the lack of equality. I mean, we have an extremely rich capital city, which is richer than Berlin or Stockholm and so on, and we have an extremely poor rural area. And so we can imagine a positive future for the Romanian democracy if we see a candidate or a president and a government involving or investing money in education and health, and trying somehow to bridge the differences between rural and urban areas. And I also think that there is a little bit of hope, at least with regard to a president that might invest voluntarily in bridging the two camps. I mean, yesterday there was really a puzzling and offensive comment by a journalist, a leading journalist, complaining about the fact that the problems in the Romanian democracy is linked to the fact that poor people reproduce themselves too much. So there is an imbalance between intellectuals who made a limited number of children, and poor people that made too many children. And of course, he implied that some were less intellectually equipped to deal with the complexities of the world, while others, of course, were well equipped. I mean, this is not the way to solve a democracy. This is simply eugenics, and the only solution is to try to say that there is a problem. And even those with traditional values, those living at underdeveloped areas, those living abroad looking for solutions and options to come back to Romania, they are also part of a community that can bring together a project. However, I have to say that this kind of discourse cannot be seen in the current campaign. Everybody speaks to a camp, and everybody invests in a highly polarizing message. The other element of hope that I see is that while Mr. Georgescu was not connected to a party, despite, of course, the connection that we discovered afterwards with the POT party, Simeon is part of the ECR, and I think this is something that we have to pay attention to. And if we look at the position of Giorgia Meloni, Italy, and more in general the position of the ECR, we can see that they have become more mainstream, more aligned with part of the position of the European Union on several aspects. And I think that if our maintains the position, the membership within the ECR, an election of a president in the position of Giorgia Simeon won't represent a huge change, because of the fact that the ECR will be somehow as a moderator for the position of Simeon. But these are connected exclusively to my fieldwork and the fact that people working in the ECR, they are not so extremist as they are generally described in the media. But we can talk about this in the discussion.
We can hear you, Jean-Michel, your microphone.
Yeah, sorry. Then we have time for discussion. I wait yellow hand to have questions for our Mr. Ambassador. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jean-Michel. I don't know why the camera is not working. Probably because you're recording, and probably it's only for the panelists, but let me thank you. Let me thank you for this very interesting discussion, and thank the panelists for their really informative outlines on the complexity of the Romanian elections. We from Albania, we of course look very attentively how things are going, how this is unfolding. First of all, because we want to learn from the experience in the wider neighborhood. Second, because it's extremely important to see and to know what happens in a country member of the European Union, of course, to which we are very much attached, and of course, which we want and aspire to join. So it's extremely important for us to understand how this is unfolding. As if I understood everything well, the Romanian electorate finds itself in a very difficult situation, a little bit in between a rock and a hard place. If I understand you very well, Sergiu, I mean, there is no really very good outcome since either side people are really expressing themselves in a vote of protest. They want to punish the political class. They really want to give a signal that business as usual cannot go on, but with a very bad choice. My question would be, although Sorina spoke a little bit about that, but I mean, my question would be, in the worst case scenario, if Simion is elected, how much would that affect Romanian foreign policy? How much would that affect the position of Romania in the European Union, its attachment to enlargement, and of course, its attachment to the everything that we know and we want to, embrace the European values, and of course, the function of the European Union, given the fact that it might also, not alone, but also create a little bit of a hub of those who really have a different view of the European Union in the future. So thank you. Okay, I propose to take another question for another ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, dear John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. I had a question on the Trump factor. How do you evaluate the Trump factor in the coming weeks? Do you expect that the US, that Washington will intervene in the campaign, and if so, for which candidate? Do you expect that it will end up in bringing a war in the government? And the same question as the ambassador of Albania is Romania. Will Romania be able to keep balance between the three traditional pillars of its foreign policy: Washington, NATO, and Europe, or will it go much more towards Washington? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can begin with Sorina for this time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments and questions. What happens if Simion wins the election? I think that, as I try to say, I'm quite I would say optimistic in the sense that since Simion is part of the ECR, there will be capacity, a space of maneuvering from the European arena in order to limit, let's say, a break with the European. With the traditional three pillars, although in my understanding, the countries from Eastern Europe, without an immediate investment in military troops that will guarantee their safety there, will not be able to distance themselves from Washington. So they are looking at in this moment for security reassurance from Trump presidency, because in particular in the Romanian case, we have the widest border with Ukraine, and the stake of the negotiation for peace in Ukraine are, of course, higher. vulnerability in the Romanian case, but is even higher if we take into consideration the Moldova situation and the position, for example, of the governor of Găgăuția, which is under process and asks for the support of Russia, accusing the authorities of Chișinău of political process in a case of what at least looks like a case of corruption. However, since Georgescu is a candidate particularly close to the cause of the unification with Moldova, most probably this is the trickiest point on the agenda. So not so much the issue of trying to find a balance between Washington, NATO, and the EU. How is he going to deal with Moldova, considering that he does not accept the difference between Romania and Moldova, and he's not, for example, allowed to visit Moldova or Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken, also Ukraine, because he's considered persona non grata in both countries. The Trump factor in the coming weeks, I think it is very difficult to anticipate. But in my reading, although I'm not living in Romania, I'm able to follow different TV shows. It is really impressive how Antonescu in particular, but also Nicușor Dan, and of course Ponta, they tried to move quite rapidly in a space of a thematic space which is closer to the position taken by Trump administration than the position taken by the European Union. And they both, for example, all of them try to, for example, raise question about the negative impact of the Soros network, which has been particularly celebrated in the 90s, allowing a lot of colleagues, myself also, to benefit from different grants that allowed me to get in contact with the Western academia. But nowadays they try to target the Soros network, the work values, traditional, and to ask for a return to traditional values and religious values in Romania, which in my understanding echo a lot the Trump agenda.
Thank you very much, Claudiu Tufiș.
Yes, I'll start by saying that I'm not really a specialist in foreign affairs, and Sergiu will probably have a lot more interesting things to say. The only thing that I would say is that, in my opinion, all of the candidates that we have for the presidential election, if you try to place them on the left-right scale, they are center-right to extreme-right, in my opinion. Not even center, I would say. Maybe Nicușor Dan would probably be closer to center rather than center-right. But that's on the left-right scale. If you also try to place them on the Galtan scale, on the liberties, authoritarianism, then probably most of them are going to be clustered again from the middle of the scales towards the authoritarian scale. So if you combine all of them, you end up with the whole package of candidates, 11 candidates that we have, all of them clustered into a single quadrant, and it's the quadrant that is conservative and authoritarian. That's my reading of the current batch of the candidates. So to me, it's not surprising that they were moving towards Trump, because Trump seems to reflect for them exactly the values that they appreciate, conservative values, what they consider to be traditional values, which is a shortcut for basically fighting against any sort of identity politics, any sort of differences in terms of religion and sexual positions. So from that perspective, the candidates reflect exactly what is, at the moment, the dominant perspective within the Romanian society, I would say. But it is a dominant one because a significant part of the Romanian population is basically muted and does not have access to surprisingly in a way, does not have access, does not have the same resources to make their message heard. So part of the people that are angry about against what's happening in Romania up to this moment are people that you would normally consider somewhere on the left side of the political spectrum. And they have never had, even though we have a social democratic party, they never had a true candidate, a true political party, a true political actor to represent their issue and their voice. In my opinion, they are betting, all of these candidates that are going towards Trump are betting on the wrong horse. For two reasons. One, Trump, I suspect, will start having internal problems due to whatever he's doing these days, quite soon. So I suspect by the end of 2025, the beginning of 2026, he will be swamped with all sorts of internal problems, fights that will need to solve internally, and that is adding to his perspective of moving away from Europe and focusing whatever is happening in Asia and trying to switch from projecting power in Europe towards projecting power in China, so that he controls that part of the world. So from that perspective, they're betting on the wrong horse, and I think Romania at this moment in time should realize that it's no longer a valid strategy to try and combine playing nice with all of the powerful guys on the arena, and Romania should focus on the only opportunity that it has right now, the only chance that it has right now, and that is to go 100% towards the European Union and play together with the European Union whatever policy the EU has towards the United States of America. So as long as we are continuing to play a separate position from the European Union when it comes to the United States of America, we're going to make angry both the United States and our European Union allies. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. But again, this is just looking from outside. I'm not a specialist in foreign affairs, and I'm rather interested in seeing what Sergiu is going to say about it.
Then, a specialist of foreign policy, Sergiu.
Well, more or less, I would just add, because the two angles have been complementary and very, very interesting and quite substantive, in spite of the modesty of Claudiu. I would just add the fact that my take is that, because the question referred, the first question of His Excellency referred to the eventuality George Simeon is elected. My belief is that he would try to follow rather closer models such as Viktor Orban. Why is that? Because it is very difficult to follow Trump, a global player, a superpower, a leader of the world. It is rather easier to follow a model that is quite characteristic to what we have in the region, with a margin of maneuver of a small state with also the limited capacity to influence politics, but with a world existing out there, and this goes beyond the balance between the three traditional pillars that was evoked very well here. Doing his Orban, Mr. Simeon would rather bet on other allies, on China, on different African countries, on Latin American countries. He would try to create the impression that he could become rapidly a frequentable leader worldwide, and this will reduce the pressure upon himself in deciding on which pillar to stress. And in relation with Trump, I do believe that he would become very be rapidly disappointed of the lack of support if it's not really to buy American weapons or to extend the magnitude of the direct American influence, the lack of interest of Trump about the real stake of Simeon's message, and this would not really create a strong rapprochement to the United States of America, although of course some networks in the United States would continue to back a president. And one of the most important issues here is to know if he be able to recreate a majority around the prime minister promoted from our, maybe with the help of the most traditionalistic parts of the Social Democratic Party and many other opportunist politicians. If this majority is created, of course, this could influence also the capacity of the president to weigh over foreign policy, not only over domestic policy, and this could reinforce the urbanization of the profile. This is my view over what he could do if elected, which is of course for those praising liberal democracy and the European projection of Romania very, very dangerous and detrimental.
If I may just add to what Sergiu was saying, two elements. I agree with Sergiu that probably a sort of urbanization it's the easiest path for Giorgio Simeon. I would just add to that based on what we've seen happening in Hungary throughout the period of time that Viktor Orban was in power, in order for that to succeed, Simeon would need to probably provide at least 5 years of economic success, which I don't see possible at this moment in time. And not only because he is unable to do that, he and his party, but also because of the international context. And second, based on my discussions with all of my friends in the Hungarian academic world, if Giorgio Simeon were to actually try and go towards this idea, then probably all of us who talk here today should start right now looking for positions outside Romania, somewhere towards the west part of Europe, because I don't see how an Orban-like perspective on academic freedom would work for us. Knowing, I mean, we know each other, we know the type of values that we have, and we would probably be the first to be kicked out of the universities, with a marching band behind us. So you are presenting this in a way as probably the hopeful solution. For me, even this hopeful solution, and that somehow explains why I'm so pessimistic, even this hopeful solution that things will not be so bad, for me, that is already a terrible choice. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Now the floor is to Claudia Badulescu.
Bonsoir. Thank you so much for your presentation and for sharing your insights on the latest and most important developments from Romania. I'm also a Romanian, but happily for now based in Western-based university, so no risks, no imminent risks for me for now. I would have two questions. One on, you mentioned, Sorina, the emulation, superficial emulation of the rhetoric, the far-right rhetorics, and I wonder if you noticed a similar emulation of the TikTok campaign, whether there is a shift from typical, how should I say, mainstream political campaign to the online and mainly TikTok campaign, and whether we will have a similar risk of seeing a large share of TikTok, how should I say, support via and voting in the main elections from the presidential elections in May. So that would be one, and then two. what do you think the EU can do to protect democracy in Romania? And if we think of Orban and what's been happening in Hungary over the past few years, we see that the EU cannot do much against authoritarian behavior. So do you think if things go too far, this will trigger a kind of a radical shift in the EU's response to democratic backsliding? And if so, in what directions? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorina.
Thank you, Claudia. Claudia, I know your names from articles, so it's a pleasure to meet you online. So to put a face on name. Thank you for your questions. I will start with the second question because it's a little bit easier for me to answer. What can EU do to protect democracy? Well, I think that we already see a couple of signs in the European arena, and in particular, the German Chancellor has taken quite a bold position, saying that it's time to be more rigid with Hungary and to block funds and even suspend membership. So the German position is particularly relevant because Germany still has a quite relevant number of MEP in both EPP and the Socialists and Democrats. So they can trigger at least at the beginning of the process, a harsher position against Hungary. And in case this happens, this would be a bad example or an obstacle for Giorgia Simeon. Although I highly appreciate both Claudio and Sergio, I work with them, I do not agree that there is a risk of urbanization immediately in Romania, not only because of the economic context, but also because what Simeon does not have compared to both Fico and Orban is a party, a strong party behind him. Ours is increasingly organized, but is also highly divided. And we saw that the divisions between Terziu and Simeon, and most probably, at least in case of a victory in the presidential election, we won't be able to implement this full urbanization in Romania. Plus, this full urbanization will need something that I think we have. Yes, we do. We have a counter-hegemonic discourse in our universities, which is leaning, far-right leaning. We do have this, but we still do not have, at least in the public discourse, a lot of legitimacy for this kind of position. They are still, as I said yesterday, they are still targeted as anti-democratic. So for the time being, I think that what can EU do to protect democracy in Romania is starting to give an example, in particular with Hungary and Slovakia. It's a harsh road, but not impossible. About the superficial emulation, I say superficial because I think it's very difficult to talk about credible programs when Sergio has illustrated in a brilliant way. Victor Ponta shifted so many, moved from, being a far left to then being a central left, and then being a European, and then center right, and now he is far right somehow. It's very difficult, and we know from the literature that when mainstream candidates try to emulate position emerging from the radical right constellation, they normally fail because voters are not stupid. Voters will tend to privilege the most credible solution, which is the original one. So the superficial emulation, I think it's in the public discourse, and to the extent of I'm not present on social network voluntarily. I'm an old person, and probably I want to say to protect my mental health. But from TikToks that I receive from people working in political parties, also for different candidates like Georgescu and so on, former candidates, I think that TikTok did not change a lot. The logic of the campaign remains more or less the same, and I see kind of emulation also for the mainstream parties. So it looks like once again Lampedusa was white. They change everything in order to make everything look the same.
Thank you.
Thank
Sergiu?
you.
Yeah, so thank you, Claudia. Nice to see you again. So it's quite a challenge to answer these questions. On TikTok, yes, there is an emulation. All the candidates try now to invest TikTok to repeat what Georgescu did, following sometimes in a quite hilarious ways what Georgescu did back then, which was quite serious, well organized, and with a clear message from different categories of people out there, and this will not work. Simply, this doesn't work at all. And for instance, Crin Antonescu trying to become some sort of a mini hooligan, playing words and having these inappropriate gestures and words on TikTok in order to catch all electorates is simply ridiculous, and I'm pretty sure it won't work very much. And TikTok didn't work in limiting these candidates, whatever they promised during the campaign and afterwards, when there was an inquiry and investigation, they simply ignored, and there is no tool to make them do it anyway. It's a lost operation if you want to intervene and regulate this properly. And on about what the EU could do, and this is related to my partial answer to Sorina rapidly. When I said urbanization of Simeon, I meant Simeon following the path of Orban, emulating Orban. It doesn't mean it would work and it will lead to the same results. I think that strategically he will try to play his Orban, and this could have a very limited success for all the reasons you mentioned, and I very much agree with them. And a part of the possible limited success is related also on the different type of fear that the EU sanctions inspire generally in Romania as compared to Hungary. In Hungary, Orban succeeded to endure so much the skin of the Hungarians that when they hear about the EU sanctions, they believe that this is a poor joke, among others. While in Romania, such words produce an earthquake, because the consciousness about the dependence on the EU subsidies is much higher. That's why Simeon is much more prudent about the EU than other candidates of the far right in other countries. So all in all, the EU could exert via the money and threats more pressure, more maybe efficient pressures over Romania than over other countries, and this could be a mechanism of semi-regulation of the positions of such a president. And typically, I think that the double discourse would very well work once again. One discourse for Europe, one discourse for the domestic public, and a mixture of policies that would try in the end to compensate both, to create advantage from both positions. While of course in the end this could lead to not scoring anything and losing on both sides. That's also possible. So I don't see Simeon as a triumphant president if elected, but I think he would try, given his margin of maneuver, which is still limited, to imitate Orban in his behavior up to the moment the EU will be very tough on Romania.
Thank you. And to conclude, Professor Tufiș.
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, so that I won't keep you. Yeah, I'm glad that Sergiu mentioned this double talk. Let's not forget the Romanian politicians have always had a kind of dual relationship to the European Union. First, via our, let's call it, inferiority complex, we've always looked at validation outside, so validation from the European Union. But at the same time, this duplicity that is inherent, I would say, in Romanian politicians, while they were looking for validation from the European Union, at the same time, they were thinking that those politicians in the European Union are not smart enough to realize that we're going to double play them, and we will say as they want, and we will do as we want, and in the end, they won't even realize that we made them. So there is this sort of gangster perspective that I see in the way Romanian politicians have over time interacted with the European Union. The second thing that I wanted to mention is related to TikTok and more generally all of these communication channels, because the main story around these elections has been that via TikTok, a foreign agent has tried to influence the results of the elections. If we go back in time and look at the Romanian elections since the 1990s to the present time, I would argue that basically at each round of elections, of course, maybe it was not a foreign actor that was involved, but there were channels that were heavily used by some political actors and that were inaccessible to others, right? 1990, 1992, 1996, the written mass media, the state television were all controlled by the Social Democratic Party, and basically all of the other opposition parties did not really have access to those channels, equal access and equal treatment from those channels. So from that perspective, the first three rounds of elections in Romania have been, in a way, again skewed in this way, with one party benefiting from support from whoever you want to call the force behind. As we move towards the present time, I'm not going to talk about 2000, 2004 because I don't know that period of time very well. I was out of the country and not really paying attention to what was happening in Romania. But after that, if you remember, we had this People's Party, Dan Diaconescu, which basically came to power using two TV channels. So let's call it the Italian way or whatever, the Berlusconi way, how you want to think about it. So it was a move from the state-owned media to the private-owned media that was supporting this political party. Of course, the context was a little bit different, but you get the idea. And then as we move even closer to the present and the first time that Save Romania Union came into power, acceded into the parliament, of course, they did not have communication channels, traditional communication channels. They did not have access to newspapers, to TV stations, but they did have access to social networks more generally. So that was the first iteration of using social networks to gain force where you didn't have it. To that, of course, we should add the force that was coming from the streets, from the social movement that was behind the Save Romania Union. And then the next iteration was, of course, AUR with their focus on the social networks as well. And finally, this last round we had TikTok. So in a way, I think we can make an argument that over time there has been capturing, or not necessarily capturing, but one political actor was probably faster than the others in realizing the potential of a particular channel, communication channel, to get to voters in a different way. And they used it first and they won with that. Of course, they did not win the elections, but they won seats into the parliament. And from that perspective, I would say that the same was happening with TikTok. Of course, there is this added element that there was a foreign intervention in there. So things are complicating a little bit the story. But in the future, I would expect that the same is going to basically be the regular way of doing elections pretty much everywhere in the world. All countries are going to be messing up with other countries' elections for various reasons. So, of course, in some cases, there's going to be malefic ones like Russia. In other cases, it's just going to be somebody who tries to whatever, nudge a candidate into a position or another. But I think at the moment we don't have a solution for that. We can't ban TikTok. We can't ban a particular social network. The only thing that we can do is actually, teach people how to recognize this sort of interference and then figure out for themselves. Unfortunately, that is a very long-term solution, and it doesn't really work in the next 5 or 10 years. So that's something that will happen over 20 years. Plus, of course, as people, we do need time to learn how to interact with this huge information that we have. We've had internet for what, 20-something years, and still we as humans, we have not learned yet how to process the amount of information that is available to us. And I think that is, to some extent, what's happening to all of us at this point. But I'm, swerving away from the topic of this discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your participation. Thank you so much, Sorina, Claudiu, and Sergiu, for your brilliant thinking. And I'm sure that we will organize a new webinar after the election. In any case, it will be very interesting. Then follow our news.
Still allowed.
Yeah. Don't forget our blog, and I will see Claudia, Sergiu, Sorina, etc. in Brussels in 2 weeks for an international conference about extreme right parties in Central and Eastern Europe. Then thank you very much. Good evening, and we keep in touch. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.